If you want to make me freak out, follow these simple steps. Just cover up your name tag and then say, "Hey, Steve, you remember my name, right?" I don't like how many people are writing this down. But cover up that name tag and then stare at me, waiting for me to remember your name. I don't think of myself as someone who has a lot of social anxiety, but there is something about other people's names and trying to remember them on the spot that unravels me. Does this happen to anyone else? Okay, good. I thought it was just me. All right. I don't remember this challenge growing up. And so I had to sit and think, and I thought, well, in school, you move through that cohort, right, with all your friends year after year, and there's just like one or two new kids you have to meet. For me, it emerged when I started teaching as a choir director. There's 200 students that you meet in that first week. And oh my goodness, was that impossible for me. I would look at that student in choir and I could hear their vocal range in my head. I could remember where they're from. I could remember what they're majoring in, where they stand in the soprano section. I could remember a lot about them. I just couldn't remember their name. And after the first few weeks, students lose their patience with, "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The truth is, I didn't hold on to my students' names for two reasons. The first is just numbers. 200 students every year is a lot of names. But more importantly, I didn't have the time, the way our classes were structured, to really get to know each person. I had just enough time to do the quick one-on-one audition. Where are you from? What are you majoring in? How high and low can you sing? And so I remembered those things. But when you're teaching 80 people at a time, you don't have a lot of back and forth personally. So you can go years without ever actually knowing the name of the student you're grading and teaching. It's not good. So this horrible feeling arises when that student comes up to you, a student you've taught for several years, and they invite you suddenly into something personal in their lives. And you're really spending that conversation going, I think it's Morgan, but I don't remember if it's Morgan A or Morgan S. It's too late then to say, do I know you? Just to assuage your concern, I did get better at this. But the nerves that come up when you interact with this other person, they carry beyond teaching. For many of us, coffee hour is kind of hard. If you've been here for decades, maybe not so. Over the last 30, 40 years, you've developed really tight-knit, close relationships, and you're just seeing friend after friend, and there's just that one new person you want to say hi to. But I just came in September, and if you cover your name tag, I'll go, hey, you. How's it going? It's very hard, and I don't know a person yet. And how could you, right? How could you get to know 200 or 300 people immediately? So you're entering into this big space where it seems like everyone else knows each other, and you're just trying to plug yourself in. So what's the first conversation you bring up with someone that you don't know?
Weather.
Yes, the weather, good, 100%, right? For Mike, okay, so close. But of course we talk about the weather. Of course we say, oh, crazy weather we're having. It would be weird if we didn't, if we tried to pick a conversation about something very specific to our own interests. If I was like, hey, Mike, what do you think about Apple's third quarter earning projections? Right? That's a tough conversation to start with because who's following Apple's price-earnings ratios? Someone, but not all of us. But I know that you're subject to the same climate I'm in, so we can start there, right? It is a great big world, and there are so many people and so much in it. And it's all well and good to try and draw that bigger circle for the people that you don't know to include everyone. But we need help making sense of this dizzying complexity. So I bring you good news. Your brains are fantastic at simplifying the complex. We stay sane because our brains work so hard at classifying things. We put things into groups. We learn to taxonomize, to make categories. Yes? It is delightful to watch a toddler learn how to do this as they sit in your lap and you're reading a book, and they learn in that moment that the pizza and the tire and the ball all share a thing that we will call circle. Or they turn to the next page, and the mouthwash, and the frog, and the leaf, they all share this thing that we call green. Taxonomy is so helpful at simplifying the too complex world that we live in, because you cannot attend to everything as its own thing. Taxonomy is helpful up into the point that it isn't. I remember teaching a student that I identified visually as Central American, and she had a Central American last name. And she was a music education student taking my course in how to be a choir director. The topic that day was coming up with accompaniments for songs, and so I needed to pick a song that I thought she knew. So I started playing a Catholic hymn, because in my brain I was attaching the identity of Mexican American to the identity of Catholic. And she looked at me blankly and said, "I don't know that one." And I went inside my brain, "Shame on you, Steve, you're assuming a Catholic religion attached to a Mexican nationality, or at least ethnic heritage." And I remembered that Pentecostalism had a huge surge in Central America. So I switched over to an evangelical hymn, and she went, "I don't know that one either." But in temple, we like to sing Shema Yisrael Adonai. Do you know that one? And I did, and so I started playing that. But in that moment, and you're having it too, was the realization that I didn't have a box on the shelf for Mexican American Jewish identity. And it just hit me in that moment how I'd been making a taxonomy that didn't help. So we made it through that class okay. But it reminded me that we're all pretty good at making assumptions until we're not. Last week, Liz and I were talking about this service, and I made a categorical assumption in the conversation with Liz about categorical assumptions. So I said that I was debating about whether we should title this sermon, "Who Do You Say That I Am?" This is a question that Jesus asks about 100 times throughout the 4 canonical Gospels. And literally, it's such a great question the way the gospel writers use it, because you, the reader, understand who Jesus is, but the people in Jesus' life don't, right? They have categories in their minds for rabbi and teacher, miracle worker and healer, but no one in the time that Jesus is moving about have a category for Son of God and Messiah. So you get this moment as a reader of the text to go, I know something that this character doesn't. And I'm talking about this, and then Liz said, I actually don't know the Gospels. And I said, oh, I guess I assumed you grew up Christian. And she said, nope, Unitarian born and bred. And we didn't cover the Gospel. And I was moving about with this assumption that it's right 85% of the time, that people my age and older who come to Unitarian Universalism come to it as a chosen denomination, having first grown up in a Christian context. As I'm talking about taxonomy and assumption with Liz, I made one in the very conversation. The irony. We've all been on the receiving ends of assumptions too, yes? Where one of your identities, people go, oh, that must be bundled with this, like home and auto, right? So if I tell you that I was a music professor at a liberal arts college who's becoming a Unitarian Universalist minister, you are correct. I do have a hybrid vehicle. Yeah. It's a plug-in hybrid. And you're also correct that I read The New Yorker on subscription. But I also wear a Carhartt jacket in the winter, and I know how to fire a rifle, and I have strong opinions about the Bears' defense, which I will not share. And it first emerged for me in high school because I was so passionate about being in the dance troupe and about being in the choir and about being in musicals. And at this point in my life, everyone assumed because of those interests that I was also gay. And Right? And they were making a taxonomy about it, and no one knew what to do with me saying, I love those things, and I'm also heterosexual. I had a brother try and intervene before my wedding to say, it's okay, we love you, right? And I didn't know what to do with his assumption. I was like, these are things that you can love that don't dictate who you love, right? He didn't know where to put both of those categories together. Our stories remind us that we bundle an identity with another, but as Liz mentioned, if you take the time to write them out, you can come up with 20, 30, 40, 50 different identities, most of which you can't see. What do you find funny? What is Netflix telling you to watch? What do you like to eat? You contain multitudes. I mean, really take a moment to reflect on the library of identities that is you. There's a $10 word that graduate students use to describe this. It's called alterity, A-L-T-E-R-I-T-Y. Alterity refers to the unknowable and unrecognizable complexity of the other person. In other words, everyone you meet is irreducibly complex and can't be fit into 3 or 4 boxes. No one fits all of your taxonomies. You never really know all of what is going on in this other person's mind because you never know everything about them. And every time you've had a conversation with someone where you say something and they go, oh, I know who you are and I know what this is about, and it drives you crazy, that's alterity. They can't ever fully know you. So this shows up when we talk about elections and we start talking about voting blocks. In these conversations where we try and blend together 3 identities, we'll say suburban white moms. And so suburban is a broad category of economic and also social. So there's a couple circles there. And then when we say white, we're racializing. And then when we say moms, we're talking both about assigned sex as birth capable. And we're also talking about gender representation. I move in the world as a woman. Right? And even when you get it down to that, like 4 circles in the Venn diagram, it's a split on the election, right? It doesn't predict which way it's going to go. That population is not a monolith. Where identity really hits home for me is when you think about siblings. If you grew up with biological siblings, you share everything in common. And as the 4th, that included all of their clothes. You share everything. You had the same zip code, which is what most sociologists will tell you is all they need to know about you, right? You shared the same home. You shared the same parents, the same culture, the same religion, the same diet, the same water, the same DNA. 99.999-ish%. Like just round up to 100. You share everything in common, and yet if you have a sibling, oh, they are different than you. They are different than you, right? So even if we can boil it down to all of the circles overlapping, something about you is irreducibly different and complicated. And that is the beautiful, terrifying, and awesome truth. No one is reducible to a set of identities. We've spent this July talking about identity, and we have to wrestle with this. No one is the sum of the identities that you see. And the more we try to shortcut that process of knowing one another by reaching for those identity-based connections, the more we hold ourselves back from seeing the beautiful, complicated, and unfolding stories of this other human being. This idea of alterity, this idea that I will never fully know you, comes to me from the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. But it's not always loved, okay? The theologian Ivone Gabarra, who's a Brazilian ecofeminist theologian, she pushes back on Levinas. She says that yes, this stance of unknowability is true, but it can also push us into a kind of resignation, a kind of unreachability. I'm never going to really know you anyway, so why bother? My circle's big enough as it is. Instead, Gabarra says, honor the unknowability and still reach out, still draw that circle. She writes, when we see, hear, or touch the other, we touch upon the other's scars. As self and other emerge from this interhuman encounter, they come forth as new creatures. Scars become transfigured in the divine embrace again and again and again. In other words, a too easy reading of Levinas would say, you never really know what's going on with the other person, and then just leave it there. But Guevara finishes the sentence. She says, yes. So reach out, draw that circle, get in relationship, knowing that you'll never fully know them. Now, Yvonne Guevara is a Christian theologian, so for her, this is spiritual work. Christians and Jews believe that we are created in God's image, imago Dei. That each of us and all of us are a reflection of God. To embrace this other person, to know their name, to hear their stories, to understand their hopes and fears, is in a way to get to know another part of the infinitely complex God. It is a theological commitment to honor God by honoring the complexity and beauty of each facet of God in this world. And when I say facet, I mean Liz or Don or Kari or Desiree. If you accept that everyone is made in God's image, as our universalist ancestors did to some notable opposition, then you accept the bold claim that everyone you meet is a part of God. And therefore, and this is where we got a lot of pushback from other denominations, everyone has some kind of inherent worth and dignity. Everyone has some sort of divine spark that is alive in a unique and complicated way. When we see this divinity in one another, we can't help but see our interrelatedness as mutual facets. Buddhism teaches us that we exist communally, never separately. There is no such thing as a circle as big as you. I like to think of it as living in a snow globe of interdependent particles. That is to say, the air on this planet that I breathe, you breathe. It's also the same air that our ancestors breathed. Breathed. It's also the same air that 7 generations from now will breathe. It's a snow globe. We coexist and inter-are in an interdependent web of existence with each node infinite, and by node I mean you and you, infinite in your complexity and connection. And that is why the great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh writes, please call me by my true names so I can wake up and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. Remembering that Buddha means awakened one. Our unknowability, our infinite complexity is not simply housed in skin and bone that we call Steve, but rather it is woven together. This oppressive heat that you and I are feeling is the same heat. Sorry, Zoom, it's hot in here. It's not just that I can't reduce you to a few boxes, it's that you and I are coexisting in this together. And making these authentic relationships takes time. It takes a long time to get past the weather and the Green Bay Packers and to move into fears and hopes and pains and quirks that make us who we are. That takes time. And so when I think about it that way, I have a little more compassion for myself that I didn't know which Morgan I was talking to. We had a 1-hour class twice a week with a rotating group of 80. No one in the room knew everyone's name. How could we? Getting to know one another takes that time and curiosity and vulnerability, and my friends, those 3 things are in short supply. And I think that's the work that our spiritual groups, our poetry discussion, our meditation, our theme circles, those groups are the site of your deepest connection because they require time. They require curiosity to learn, and they require a vulnerability to share. I don't want to make today's coffee hour feel weird. You don't need to grab your cup of coffee and then just stare into the other person's eyes and say, tell me about your deepest fears. That's not cool, okay? Chatting about the weather is a great opener. And not just because we're all subjects to its power, but because of where the other person goes with it. Whew, crazy weather we're having. Yeah, I haven't gotten any gardening done in this rain. Tell me more about your garden. I didn't know you were a gardener. Crazy weather we're having. You know, honestly, I've been at the office so much I haven't been outside. Tell me more about work. I didn't realize you were so busy. Where the other person opens is a place for conversation and connection. So when I look back, I think about how Buddhists talk about learning with an open palm. An open palm holds on to nothing. It holds on to no preconceptions or guesses based on what I see from you. When I failed to imagine that a Mexican-American student could be Jewish, my fist was holding on to a taxonomy. With the stories we share, I don't think of them as examples of me or you or anyone else being evil, but rather distracted, not yet awake to the capacity of the divine in the other. Here's the thing, when I am at my lowest, when I'm my most exhausted, stressed, angry, fed up, anxious, I am all taxonomies all the time. And it sounds like this. She is just such a micromanager. Or he is just hopelessly narcissistic. Or they just hate us and what we stand for. When I'm at my worst, this other person or group is always just this or that. As simple and refined as can be, I'm going to say that I'm probably not the only person in the room that does this. But I've learned that anytime I want to describe another person or a group of people as just something, that's the fire alarm of my soul going off. And it's time to take a walk or take a breath. Because, my friends, our UU theology stakes two big claims. One, that everyone you encounter is a reflection of the divine. And two, that we are all of us interconnected. As we learn to appreciate ourselves as irreducibly complex in the way that divinity is, we learn to see other people that way. And as we learn to see other people as irreducibly complex, we learn to see ourselves in this web of being. And I know that's exhausting. On a Sunday morning, taxonomies are way easier. But we've given taxonomical thinking a go for the past 5,000 years. It strikes me as a pretty violent and exploitative path. I just wonder up here today what it might be like to give complexity and curiosity a chance. Armor down, palms open, empathy and curiosity forward. No longer, I'm sorry, do I know you? But now the courageous redrawing of the circle into, tell me more about that. May it be so.